one needs to compare Libya with, not with perfection, but with other countries in the region. I noticed, for example, that the Human Rights Watch website today has a major report, I think it's 3 or 4 days old, and the heading is Egypt and Libya, a year of serious abuses. And I thought that was quite striking as an illustration of what I have always had in mind in considering Libya, that in spite of the ghastly history which I've alluded to, the shocking abuses which are to be found in Libyan history, unfortunately, if you look at Libya's neighbours, you find that the same picture is repeated again and again. To the west, you have Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco. To the east, you have Egypt, Sudan, Israel, Palestine, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Iraq. Which of these countries can be offered as an example of a decent standard of human rights? Not one, I'm afraid, not one. And while we're about it, I think that the British people in the room ought to be a little bit humble in approaching these subjects, because after all, we've learned in the last day or two of what we'd guessed for a long time, which is that we had a government which was capable of disregarding professional legal advice and embarking on an aggressive war. One thing which I think is a bit special to Libya and different from other countries is the lack of transparency. It's really very, very difficult to know what's going on in Libya. Joma spoke just now eloquently about the Mussolini massacre, and of course you can't altogether hide the murder of 1,200 or thereabouts people, especially not in a small country with the strong family and tribal links which exist in Libya. But I think I'm right in saying that it was a long time before anybody had a very clear idea of what had happened. And even now, I've not been able myself to put together a really convincing account of what happened. It was obviously an appalling event, and I listened to Joma's account of it. But for a long time, it was scarcely known. And that, I think, is the reason why, for the point that he made, that it hasn't had the attention it deserves outside, because the media and so on were not aware of it, gradually became aware of it, are aware of it now, should be making more of it, but it didn't come as you would expect such an item of news to come, as big headlines on day one, so to speak. In a different way, another example, I think, of lack of transparency is the story of Hisham Matar and his father, Jabal Matar. You've probably read about this, and you've seen that the British government have...
We have another case as well as it in Libya. The same similar story.
I'm sorry?
We have the same case as it.
Yes.
As it.
So the only point I wanted to make about that is that apparently Hisham Matar was under the impression for nearly 20 years that his father had died or was dead. And it's only now that some report has come up that somebody claims to have seen him, and so the possibility is there that he may be alive. This is an extraordinary story, but I'm afraid it's a rather typical Libyan story. It's very, very difficult to know what is going on. I mentioned the context. The context, another aspect of Libya that I want to mention is that while all these things that I referred to at the beginning, like the support for IRA and the Abu Nidal organisation and Yvonne Fletcher and so on, were marked the first 20 years or so of the revolutionary period in Libya. For a good many years now, there has been a very, very slow movement toward normalisation in Libya. And that doesn't just apply in the field of human rights, it applies to in many other areas as well, economic reform and so on. I asked a Libyan friend of mine a couple of days ago, and he's not a supporter of the regime, when he thought this change began, and he said without hesitation 1987, so it's a long time ago. We've got a 40-year revolutionary period, of which the first 20 years was black, the second 20 years is black. The question is how grey or how light grey it has become or may become. Until recently, it was possible to say that this process of normalisation had been all one way. Until recently, I don't think there were any examples of backsliding. But unfortunately, that is no longer true. And Juma mentioned the matter of the People's Court, or the replacement by the State Security Court, which is a clear example, I'm afraid, of backsliding. And another is the disappearance, we don't know whether it's permanent or temporary, of the two new newspapers which had appeared under the general patronage, if you like, of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, Gaddafi's second son. They weren't independent newspapers, but they were better than the other newspapers by a long way. A lot of problems remain. The process of normalisation I refer to, although it's gone on for such a long time, is by no means complete. I'm looking forward to hearing about the press conference which Human Rights Watch was able to mount in Libya. The fact that they were able to visit, not the first time, I think it was, if I'm not wrong, the second time, represents an important movement in the right direction. I'll stop there, I've run out of time. I hope I've not been too much of an advocate either for or against anything in particular. I tried to say it the way I think it is.
Oliver, thank you very much, and I'm sure that Daniel Kauzinski, the Member of Parliament who has written a new book, Seeking Gaddafi, and a man who's expert on these matters, would enlighten us from the other side. So that, this is a great pleasure to ask Daniel to address us now.
Thank you very much. I'm chairman of the all-party group on Libya, so following in your great footsteps. And I have written a book on Colonel Gaddafi, which is being published next month, and Seeking Gaddafi, and it tries to be an even-handed analysis of Colonel Gaddafi and the Libyan regime. It highlights concerns, outstanding concerns between our two nations, but it also talks about some of the injustices that Libya has faced from the West, and tries to assess them, such as has already been mentioned, the bombing of Tripoli in 1986, which I thought was a very difficult, almost a warning sign for us that if Western politicians are allowed to abuse the United Nations in small ways, then they carry on like an addict, going further and further and further. And I think at the time of the bombing of Tripoli in '86, it was only the BBC that were very highly critical of what was going on. Some of you may remember those Kate Adey reports from Tripoli, which talked about the extraordinary human suffering that took place. Now, I'm absolutely convinced that Tripoli was bombed in '86 because Ronald Reagan was having difficulties in Lebanon with the hostages, Marines being taken hostage, and he wanted to flex some muscle, and he felt that Libya was a soft touch. So the book tries to, it's the first time in 60 years that a Member of Parliament has written about an Arab leader, and I think it's extremely important to take time for Western politicians to take time to try to assess these regimes properly, and rather than just be critical of them, try to understand some of the cultural aspects and some of the difficulties that these regimes face. I'm very grateful to Lord Ahmed for organising this conference, because I do believe it is important to talk about human rights. I think the Libyans may think it's purely a matter for domestic issues, and that we in the United Kingdom have no right to poke our noses in to human rights issues in Libya. I disagree with that fundamentally. I'm passionate, as chairman of the All-Party Group for Libya, I'm passionate about improving relations with Libya, increasing trade, greater exchange, cultural, economic exchanges between the two countries. But I could only have total confidence in promoting those things if I know that the regime is serious about improving human rights, because we in the United Kingdom feel very passionately about human rights, and we hope that our partners also are moving towards that. Now, with regards to terrorism, again, trying to be even-handed, the Libyans supported many organizations. Now, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. And I will tell you two very contrasting organizations that Colonel Gaddafi funded. One of them, as has been said, was the IRA. And as a British politician, you can imagine, and it's covered in my book here, some of the suffering that British families went through as a result of IRA atrocities. Of course, Semtex was provided to the IRA by Colonel Gaddafi. Of course, as a British politician, I would be highly critical about the funding of the IRA and support of the IRA, and very upset about that.